Hi, this is Scott, and welcome to the 20th episode of the Imaginarium. I want to take a moment and thank everyone who listens, because without you, there would be no show. And today we have another double shot of Imaginarium goodness. First up is Joan Steiger, widow of Rod Steiger, and in 20 minutes we managed to talk about decades of work in Hollywood, Rod Steiger, Leona Helmsley, Don Knotts, and Elizabeth Taylor, to name just a few. Joan was an absolute delight, and I could have spent all afternoon talking to her. And from old Hollywood, we traveled to current indie horror with the one and only Jerry Janda Jr. Jerry is the writer, producer, and co-star of the phenomenal short Painkiller. We chat about writing, the difficulty of the shoot, and making the film festival circuit. Jerry's smart, funny, and someone to watch out for. I hope you enjoy the show as much as I did talking to Joan and Jerry. And now, the network identification. Enjoy the show, folks.
This is a presentation from the Supernaut Network.
Welcome to the Imaginarium, the show where art, technology, and creativity intersect and combine to forge a conversation that can only be found in the Imaginarium. I'm your host, Scott Colbert, and today's guest is dancer, actress, author, and who's also married to some of the most talented men in Hollywood, and is writing her memoirs detailing life, love, and loss, the wonderful Joan Benedict Steiger. Welcome to the show, Joan. It's a great honor to talk with you today.
Oh, well, I'm so happy to be here on this another gorgeous day here in Malibu.
You're in Malibu. It must be a beautiful day there.
Yes, it's gorgeous. It's about 85, I guess.
Well, I'm in Phoenix, so we have about the same temperature, but we're a little bit overcast today.
Uh-huh. Well, the sun is shining.
Which is unusual for us.
Yeah, so, I've been in Phoenix. It's very nice, though. But I'm a Malibuite.
Yeah, you've been in California for most of your life, haven't you? Outside of
being, I have. Oh, gosh, many years.
Now, you were born and raised in Brooklyn, correct?
Well, I wasn't raised in Brooklyn. I was raised in Rome and in Paris, but I was born in Brooklyn on Park Slope, the beautiful section. It's sort of like the Upper Fifth Avenue in Park Avenue in New York. It's very beautiful, Prospect Park, and I lived 2 doors from the park in my grandfather's brownstone home. It was very beautiful, and I hope someday to own that house again. It's about $18 million right now.
Wow.
And I have just wonderful memories because my mother had 7 brothers, and so I had 7 uncles, and I was the first grandchild. And when just between the time that I was born and I was 7, I lived at the house, and so at one time or another, one of my uncles, 1 or 4 or 5, were also living at the house, so I was a very spoiled grandchild. It was a wonderful house. I just, the rooms were so gorgeous, and I acted out little scenes in every room. It was, instead of Eloise at the Plaza, I was Joan at Prospect Park.
Sounds almost like a fairy tale.
Yeah, it is. It'll be all in my book, too.
And you wanted to be a dancer when you were a child?
Yes. I started out with my lessons at between 5 and 7. And at the time, you either took a ballet or tap, and so I took ballet and tap, and I did want to be a ballerina. And my first recital, actually tap dancing, was at the Brooklyn Academy of Music when I was 7. So then from Brooklyn, when I was 9, actually, my mother sent me to Rome. And I was a member of the Royal Opera Ballet School, so where I took my ballet. But I soon discovered my love for tap dancing really overcame my love for ballet. And so I'm still tap dancing twice a week here in Malibu. I've been tapping my whole life. I'm in a class with mostly girls that are all have been dancers, or they're all professionals here in Malibu, and we have a great group of about 9 or 10 girls, and we have really intricate routines that we do every week just for ourselves, and it's wonderful.
And that's good exercise, too.
Yeah, of course, I look at it. If I couldn't dance, I didn't want to live. So I don't do it for the exercise. I do it for the complete love of it.
I would assume dancing is your first love over acting?
Well, no, of course, that's hard to put it that way today, because I've done 40 plays. I've been acting since I was 18. Very busy acting. I do wish I could have been in a Broadway musical. That would have been my dream.
Now, you did a one-woman show about Leona Helmsley.
Yes, I did that at the Matrix here in Hollywood. It's a terrific theater, and that was one of my favorite plays. I spent about 6 months learning it because we did it without an intermission, so I was on stage for about an hour and 20 minutes without leaving the stage, and it was a terrific show. It was really my favorite. I had tried to get it to Broadway, and we almost did, but the prices and costs were really prohibitive.
How do you prepare for a role like Leona Helmsley? She's not the most sympathetic person in the world.
Well, actually, I found her incredible. I guess that was all the bad publicity. She found it. She was the first woman in co-ops in New York City. She was one of the founders of co-ops. She had her only son, worked with the family in real estate. He, at the time, wanted to take a vacation, and she asked him to just stay on and do one more job, and then he could go to Florida. Anyway, well, he did, and then when he went to take a vacation, his heart literally exploded in a heart attack. It was a tremendous thing for her to get over, her only child. And then she was sued by the government, and they did want to pay the money back, but the government wouldn't take it. She was quite a woman, really, very strong and creative and wonderful, and she was very deeply in love with her husband. They had a wonderful love affair in that family.
Were you able to meet her?
No, she was in jail at the time in Connecticut for the Internal Revenue.
What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding about Leona?
Well, you see, she was a strong woman at the time when they're in business, and she was like the only woman in it at the time when she started the co-op. So she had to become very tough, being strictly around men and everything. So she was strong, but terrific. I just admired her very much. Today women have many more roles and so forth in business and all of that, but she was like a pioneer. That's why I think so they just thought she was so tough and everything. Oh, she was a very strong woman. I admired her.
Now, you started TV on the Steve Allen Show. Was that your first show?
Yes, really, I would say it was. I started out, and at the time, it was the hour show at night, Sunday night show. It was very interesting because my agent at the time at William Morris, it was his first job. Of course, Bernie Brillstein became one of the biggest men in the business and wrote a book and everything. Yeah, I'm sure you know who Bernie was. I had an audition that Bernie arranged for me for. The show was sponsored at the time by a cosmetic company, excuse me, called Hazel Bishop. And Hazel Bishop was like Revlon at the time. They were looking for the commercials at the time. A lot of them were done by spokeswomen and men. And, of course, it was all live. I went for the audition, and, oh, God, it was one of those, like a cattle call with so many women. And I said to my mother, because I was on my way to Florida, oh, this is ridiculous. That girl's going to get it. Just go, well, whatever. I walked in, and I was it, and I got it. The spokeswoman on the show live on Sunday nights, it was terrific. It was a terrific job for me. Then when I finished doing my commercial job, I got on the show doing skits. That's really where John at the time, my husband-to-be, had just come back from 11 years in Rome. Well, he was just a genius. Did everything. Opera singer and writer and funny man, everything. So he at the time was on the Jack Parr show and Steve Allen and everything. So I got on doing skits. And all the originals were on there, Don Knotts and Tom Poston and everything. So that was fabulous. And, of course, later on, Don became a very good friend. I toured The Mind with the Dirty Man, the play, with Don. I did it in Atlanta with him, and then I did it out here in California at... I can't think of the theater right now, the big theater, La Mirada Performing Arts. So anyway, that was a wonderful experience. Steve Allen was a terrific person. They all became very good friends.
Now, your first husband, John,
yes,
as we mentioned prior to starting the show, has
yes.
a very long resume. He was in probably some of the most classic sitcoms and television shows.
Oh, yes. Oh, he was a regular on all the funny shows. Get Smart, Love American Style. I cannot think of the German, the prisoner show. God.
Oh, Hogan's
with
Heroes.
Bob Crane. Hogan's Heroes. He played all the visiting generals and everything. Yeah, he did all of those things. And then he did about 7 Disney films, a movie How to Succeed in Business, and 1776, you could name it. He did hundreds. He was fabulous. And then he is a writer also. He wrote The Prize Fighter with Tim Conway. And I was in The Prize Fighter.
And that was with Don Knotts as well, wasn't it?
And Don,
Yeah.
And Don, right.
I did not know that he wrote that.
Oh, yeah. You can look
Wow.
at the credits. It's him and John. Actually, it was John's creation, too.
And then you were married for 30 years, and then he passed away.
Well, he got cancer of the tongue. His whole life was really taken away from him because he was the most incredible singing voice, of course, because when he was on the Jack Parr show, Richard Rogers saw him doing his comedy and singing, and they called him in, and I never forget that day. So John wanted me to go with him. We went to the London Fontan Theater, and I stood in the back of the theater, and everyone was there. Mary Martin, Richard Rogers, Leland Hayward. Oscar Hammerstein had passed away. He was there. Vinnie Donahue, the director. And John walked around the stage. He was very handsome. He was 6'2", and he had on this fur-collared coat, and he looked very elegant. He walked around the stage with Florence Henderson. All of a sudden, we heard a voice called out, "Oh, no!" And I thought, oh, my gosh, what happened? So Richard Rogers called out. He said, well, he's not Max. He called him in for the comedy role. He's Captain Von Trapp. So in a second, he was Captain Von Trapp. Anyway, he was signed immediately for a 3-year contract to do the first original national company. Mary Martin said, you don't want it. They only had a few more performances in New York. So we traveled. So anyway, to make a long story short, we, of course, he proposed to me, and at the time I I can't tell you all of this because it's in my book. I was also dating Rod Steiger, of course, because I met Rod and John and Jeremy all at the same time in New York. But when John we did get married, and we were married in Chicago with a very big wedding arranged by Mayor Daley, and he was starring at the Schubert Theater. We were there for a year. It was fabulous. Mm-hmm.
And after he passed, then you met back up with Rod and finally married him. Was there a sense of unrequited love when you got back in touch with Rod?
Well, no, because I met Rod and John actually at the same time. I had a long, wonderful relationship with Rod in New York. I mean, I loved them both, but I loved John. Actually, I forgot I was starring. I was so busy acting. I was starring on Candid Camera. The day they called me and they said, you know, they want to sign you for a full-term contract. And I said, oh, I can't because I'm leaving with John Myers. So they said, what are you saying? I said, well, no, that's what I'm doing. When I did leave with John to travel, I was at the height of everything that was happening for me. I was doing so many drama shows, everything. And I had met Rod on when I was doing Masquerade Party, and that's when he invited me. He was starring on Broadway at Rashomon at the time. He invited me to see Rashomon, and we went to dinner afterwards. So that's when we started dating. Yeah.
Rod turned down the role of Pat, and I was reading that that's one of the biggest regrets of his life.
Yes. He said because he probably would have gone into The Godfather, and then.
But he did star as Napoleon.
Yes, he did Napoleon. I have all of those big, posters of all of those.
Rod always struck me as larger than life.
Well, those are the kind of guys that's like John was. They were both similar that way.
They definitely had commanding presence.
Oh, yes. Well, I only like men that have everything. That's why it's hard for me now. This is the first time in my whole life I've never had a man, and naturally, I mean, I've had a lot of chances, but in no way could they ever compare to Rod and John and Jeremy.
Well, how do you deal with that? With having a man in your life? Is it?
I don't know. It's the first time in my life I'm so frustrated. Yeah. They're just not out there. They don't make them that way anymore.
No. I know we're running out of time. I do want to ask you about Elizabeth Taylor was one of my mother's favorite actresses, and I know that you understudied for Elizabeth Taylor for Butterfield 8. Yes,
that's the time when I was in New York, just starting out. This was another one of my first jobs. Casting, a director of MGM also had an office in New York, and he called me one day. He said, Joan, I think I have something for you. Danny Mann, who was a famous Broadway director, and this was going to be his first directorial on a film, is going to direct a film. And they're going to shoot it in New York, the Gold Medal Studios, which was a big studio in the Bronx. Elizabeth Taylor's in California, and she does not want to come in to rehearse, and Danny, of course, wants rehearsals. So they're looking for an actress who will rehearse the whole movie for a couple of months with Danny, and also then be her stand-in and double. So it was there's no other time that I can remember that this was not the same as just an ordinary understudy or stand-in. They said if you don't, to Elizabeth, they said if you don't do Butterfield 8, you won't do Cleopatra. So anyway, I was hired, and it was a fabulous experience. I had all kinds of publicity, and it was wonderful rehearsing with Danny, and he wanted me. After this whole thing was over, first of all, I did all of that and did her double things, And before the movie was over, I said, "You mean I'm not even going to say a thing in this movie?" So they wrote the part of the secretary to her psychiatrist, who was George Boscovec, a very big dramatic actor. So I had one line, and I brought her into his office, and I said, "She's here, doctor." And since then, since 1959, I've been getting residuals for speaking up. It was a great experience. It was wonderful, and there's never been another thing like that. Oh, I forgot to say, during our shooting, there was a big SAG strike, and they all had to come. All the actors came back to California. Of course, I was in New York. And then they resumed in a couple of months. They were back again, and I was on the movie. I mean, this turned into a huge thing for me. Flashing forward, one day when married to Rod out here in California, there was a time when I was going to tell Elizabeth that, you know, I was the one, because she wanted to marry Rod. but he married me. But he was never even in any way enamored of her, but she was feeling that, I guess, or something. He just took her to lunch a couple of times. Anyway, I was going to say, because she never ever made the connection that I was her double and stand-in and all of that for Butterfield 8. But I just before she died, I was going to tell her, and then I thought, no, because now it's like, well, I got Rod and you didn't. So, yeah, that's part of the story.
Joan, I could talk to you all afternoon. I really could.
Yeah.
I will settle for your book. Is there a release date for it?
No, not yet, but I'll let you know. It's called Brooklyn Baby.
Please do. And when it comes out, I would love to have a chance to talk to you about that again.
Okay. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
We'll have links on our webpage where you can find more information about Joan. And if you enjoyed the Imaginarium, check out our other shows on the Supernauts Network at thesupernauts.com. And until next time, may all your journeys be filled with pure imagination.
This is a presentation from the Supernaut Network.
Welcome to the Imaginarium, the show where art, technology, and creativity intersect and combine to forge a conversation that can only be found in the Imaginarium. I'm your host, Scott Colbert, and today's guest is producer, writer, and actor Jerry Janda. And welcome to the show, Jerry.
Oh, thank you, Scott. Thanks for having me.
And why don't you give us a little bit of your background so the listeners can get to know you better?
Well, I guess I'm a middle-aged suburbanite. I'm not terribly exciting. I've been a lifelong horror fan, born and raised in Philly. Been, trying to write scary stories since I was a little kid. I think I knew pretty early on that I always wanted to try to write horror. I've always been drawn to it, and it's just been a real pleasure, a real thrill to actually finally have an opportunity to do that with a film. It's something I never had a chance to do before.
Right, and the film is Painkiller. Interviewed the director for it, Jeremiah Kipp, a few weeks ago. And I was very enthusiastic about the film. It's a short film, and I absolutely loved it. A lot because I'm a big David Cronenberg fan.
Right.
And I saw a lot of aspects of David Cronenberg in that. But it was very well written, and it was your first produced screenplay.
Yeah, it was actually my first screenplay, period. I just had this idea, and it bounced around in my head for a while, and I finally sat down and banged it out. But yeah, I never actually had to go online and look up a script template because I had never written one before. I needed to figure out, well, how do you actually write one of these things?
And what was the impetus for Painkiller?
The story, or how it kind of led up to all the production and everything?
Both. Yeah.
Well, I can give a little bit of background as to how I met people like Jeremiah and how I guess the background on how the people involved with Painkiller got involved with Painkiller very quickly, because it all started back in, I guess, around this time, 2013, when Rob Dimension, who's another indie filmmaker and a friend, was raising money for a film he was going to do called Baggage. And if you invested X amount of money, you could be an associate producer and you could be an extra. And I thought, well, maybe this is my opportunity to sort of live vicariously through Rob. I had no aspirations to do my own film, but I thought it would be cool if somebody went to IMDb and typed in my name would come up, right? It would come up as a producer and an extra, and I thought that would be kind of cool. Anyway, what happened a few days before I was supposed to come on set for my extra role, Rob reached out to me. The guy who was going to play his boss had to drop out last minute, and Rob asked me, would you like to play my boss? It's only a couple lines, and I was really excited. I said, yeah, absolutely, why not, right? And we did that, and that gave me an opportunity to meet Jeremiah, because Jeremiah was the director. It gave me the opportunity to work with Jeff Gould, who was a cinematographer and editor for Painkiller. So the fact that I was able to work with Rob on that film, or work for Rob, I guess is a better way of putting it, gave me the opportunity to make those connections. And then when when Baggage finally came out, and I guess it was around August of 2013 was the first screening, and I was just blown away by it. I was so thrilled to be a part of it, and I kind of stayed in touch with everybody who was involved with it. And if you know anything about Rob Dimension, he's Mr. Positive, and one day on Facebook he posted something along the lines of, people always ask me, how do you go about making an indie film? And his answer was, you just do it. You just do it. That's how it gets done. I thought about it. I said, well, I wonder if I could do something like this. And I had this idea, the idea that eventually became Painkiller, and I kind of floated it out there, and Jeremiah reached out to me and said, that sounds kind of interesting. I'd like to do that with you. And so we stayed in touch, and finally, by the time, and it took a while, well, that was my fault. By the time I actually wrote the script, he was really ready to go and work with me on that one, which was really cool. The idea, I guess the basic idea for Painkiller, plot-wise, is based on my own experiences with pain management. I herniated discs in my neck in 2008 and 2011, and both times required fusion surgery. And if any of your listeners or you have ever experienced that kind of pain, it's just constant, because it's this constant pressure on your nerves. You never get any relief. And the way they help you get through it is they prescribe a lot of pain medication. So there were periods of my life where I was on pain medication. I don't want to oversell it and act like I was a junkie or anything, but definitely by the time, if you take pain medication long enough and then you're no longer in pain, you have to wean yourself off of it, because you really do go through withdrawal, and it's a miserable experience. And so what I was trying to do with Painkiller was look at really the horrors of a real-life situation, but try to capture that symbolically in a horror film.
And I think you capture that quite well. I have a family member who was hooked on pain meds for back problems that they had. Mm-hmm. And they got to a point that they were going to different doctors to get extra prescriptions, then getting prescriptions online. I mean, it really... You don't necessarily think about prescribed medication as being that kind of addiction, but it can happen.
Again, I don't want to oversell my experience with it, but I've known people like the situation you just described, where people, they get in deep and they lose everything. It would be almost the equivalent of being addicted to heroin, right?
Yeah.
Because you're addicted to a type of opioid, and you need your fix. And in the case you just gave, we talked about going to different doctors, trying different outlets to get it. Some people go to the street, and you can actually buy it on the street, and it can get really ugly. That's sort of what I was trying to shine a light on with the film. Was there's a part in the film where the scientist talks about the downward spiral of pain management, right? And it in my mind, that's what it's like. At least my personal experience and the experience you just described, and experiences I've seen with other people. I think that's what happens to people. You get hooked, and it's a downward spiral.
And the only people that really seem to benefit from it are the pharmaceutical companies.
I didn't get too preachy, but I think maybe the undercurrent of the film was the scientists, for better or for worse, were looking for an alternative to that type of pharmaceutical monopoly on pain management. So, I mean, I didn't really get into it too much, but that thought was definitely in my mind.
Was there a reason that you didn't get into it too much? Did you want to concentrate more on the story rather than making a statement?
I didn't want it to be a preachy film necessarily. I wanted to make my points, but make them through the things that I was trying to represent within the context of a horror film, rather than sort of have like big pharma as the villain or something like that. I thought it would be more interesting to have the scientists who, in their wish to do something good, actually ended up doing something pretty horrible. But their reason for doing it was because of the experiences you and I just described. They had seen people go through suffering, gone through addiction to pain medication. So they thought, well, maybe this is a solution to that. Of course, if anybody saw the film, they know it didn't quite work out that way. It never really does in a horror film, does it?
You have an acting role in that, too, and you did quite well.
I appreciate that, yeah. Then one of the nice things about being the writer is I knew my strengths and weaknesses going into it, right? So I could maybe write around that, and I think to some degree that's what I did. Interestingly enough, a script I originally had in mind, my character wasn't even in it. I had originally envisioned the film as being a film with three characters, the scientist and the organism. They were always part of the story. They were the central point of the story. But I had originally thought it might unfold like comparison I use is Poe's The Full House of Usher, right, where the friend comes and visits, Roderick Usher and his sister, and through the course of that visit, he begins to understand what's going on until the climax of the story. And in my case, I thought I might play a friend of the scientist who hadn't heard from him in a while, goes to their house to make sure they're okay. The film begins to unfold. The scientist begins to explain what happened, and the ending of the film would have been what essentially is the beginning of the film now. But I felt like, well, that's a long way to go for that punchline. It just, I liked the idea, but it just felt too talky to me. And that was another reason why it took me a while to write it. It just wasn't complete. I felt like I had an idea there that I was happy with, but it wasn't enough, no pun intended. That's a private joke for anybody who saw the film. But then I started looking, obviously we were just talking about in terms of addiction, talking about, pain medication, or, think of substance abuse. That's what we tend to think of when we think of addiction. But then there were things going on in my life where I began to understand toxic relationships a little bit better, abusive relationships, codependency. And you really begin to get a sense that you can be addicted to anything. You can be addicted to a person. Once I began to look at the various aspects of addiction beyond just pain medication, it opened up new possibilities. And that's where the idea for my character came along. But then I needed a reason for my character to enter these people's lives. That's when the character for the dominatrix came along, and she was meant to be sort of the segue between that couple and me.
Well, that sounds like quite a departure from the original script.
Well, I mean, again, the central point with the organism and the scientist, that was always what I was driving it. But it made the film more interesting. It also opened it up to new types of genres, right? Because it wasn't just a body horror film anymore. It wasn't just a mad scientist film anymore. It wasn't just science fiction, however you want to phrase it. It also began to have more of a psychological horror edge to it, sort of like a thriller. And I thought, wow, this has a lot of different pieces to it. And I get excited about stuff like that. I love films like that where they're sometimes impossible to put into a category. They're different things to different people. Whether I succeeded or not is, I guess, up to the viewer. But that's what I was trying to do with the film, was present something that wasn't so cookie cutter, that you could put it into a specific genre. And one of the things that has been gratifying through the whole process, as I hear from viewers, people reaching out to me, it tends to mean different things to different people. People who have suffered from chronic pain, the film definitely resonates with them on that, in that regard. And I've had people approach me because of that, and they understand. They can see the film from that angle in a way that maybe somebody who's never had chronic pain can't. But then somebody who's been in a really bad relationship can look at the film from a different perspective. And then if there's someone who's just a Cronenberg fan, which is great, I'm a Cronenberg fan too, you can kind of focus in on the organism and the body horror aspect of it. So I hope when people look at it, it gives them different things that they can appreciate. At least that was my intention.
Yeah, and I absolutely think that people can look at it from any aspect of addiction, whether it's pain medication or food or relationships or sex, exactly. and see themselves in it.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. When you look at addiction, it can be just, you name it, and somebody could become addicted to it. That's just the way we're wired as human beings.
Well, and I think also it's the way society wires us to consume more and more, and as often as possible. So.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. I think one of the things that I find interesting if we're talking about sort of like society's taboos or how this might be reflected in the film, I think as a society, I'm speaking generally, of course, when we look at someone in an abusive relationship, we tend to think, well, she ought to just leave him. In a way, that's almost like saying to a heroin addict, you should just stop doing heroin. In each situation, the person knows, hey, I'm in a really bad spot. I need to do something about that. But there's something psychological there as well. So if you've known people in abusive relationships, they might drift from one bad relationship to another, and it's just because something's happened in their life, or there's something within them where they feel kind of trapped in that situation. It's really tragic in a way, and I think the bigger tragedy is we kind of look at those people as though it's their fault, not think of them as victims, which I think to a great degree they are. And one of the things important to me in the film, when the woman in the film suffers a great deal of pain, I never wanted it to come across like exploitation. I really wanted it to be, this woman's a victim, right? I didn't want to glorify any of the violence toward her, and to a great degree, any violence that is committed against her is sort of implied or not clearly shown or heard. It's never in your face and nasty.
And that was one of the things that I liked about it is there's a couple of scenes where she's looking to create pain, and it's done in such a way, it reminded me somewhat of the way Hitchcock films the shower scene in Psycho. Most of it's implied. You don't see anything very graphic about it, but your mind creates an image that you see more than what you actually do.
And I'm so happy you said that, because that was clearly one of the templates we were going for, or at least in my mind when I was writing it. I think it's, in a way, it succeeded, and in a way, maybe it succeeded too well, because I've read reviews where people talk about the gore in the film. And I think there's really not a whole lot of gore in the film. And it reminds me of a story that Gunnar Hansen, played Leatherface in First Texas Chainsaw Massacre, would be at a convention, and the guy might come up to him and say, Texas Chainsaw Massacre had the best special effects I ever saw. I can't believe that one scene where you chainsaw a guy in half. And Gunnar would say, well, but that's not in the movie. I never chainsaw anybody in half in the movie. The guy is adamant, no, you did. I saw it. And it's in his mind. There was enough in that film. If you go back, I just read Chainsaw Confidential. That's why it's in my mind, the book that Gunnar wrote about the experience making that film. All the stuff that you think is being shown graphically, whether it's the woman going on the hook or anything with the chainsaw, it's never clearly shown, and that's what I wanted to do. Like you mentioned Psycho, and that's sort of the same philosophy, I think, right? Where less is more. But then you do have these situations where people think the implication is so good, people really do walk away from it thinking, I just saw something really gory. I can't really think of any single scene that's gory. I think the most violent scene that's in it wasn't even shot the way it was written. It was just sort of on the fly. But for the most part, I think a lot of the violence, we rob the viewer of, maybe rob is the wrong word, but we definitely want the viewer to fill in the blanks. We pull the camera back, we cut away, all these different aspects of the film, so you never see anybody get stabbed, really. You never see any of that type of, you never see anyone get hit. And that's all, was all my intent from day one when I was writing the script. I didn't want it to be a gore film. Not that I have anything against gore films, it's just didn't think it would set the right tone for what I was trying to say with this movie if it were overly gory.
Right, and even the last scene, which I won't give away, is not what I would consider really gory either.
No, yeah, I mean, again, it's told almost through sound. You can hear what's happening and you can hear people reacting to it, but you never see the actual violence. And then there are other things, I don't want to give it away either, but there are other things that are happening visually in the film which make the scene bloody, but not because the scene itself is bloody. And I'm sorry if that sounds vague to your listeners. Please watch the movie. I think you'll like it, and you'll know what I'm talking about when you get to the final scene.
Oh, absolutely, and we'll have links up for where they can catch the movie, because it's well worth seeing. And it has a very unusual IMDb score. It's got 8.5, which I think is really pretty high for IMDb.
I think that's only 11 people though, so they might be 11 family and friends. But but I think so. If you click next to that though, where the critic reviews are, we have about 20 of them, and reviews been uniformly positive. I haven't had a situation yet where I've gotten a review and I thought, well, I don't want to promote this because it really slams the movie. I think some people like it more than others, of course, and they have different criticisms of the film. But for the most part, I think, taken as a whole, the film, people have really liked it. I've gotten a lot of good feedback about it.
And you just showed it at Cafe Z this last weekend.
Oh, that was a blast! Yeah, and thanks to Todd, and all those guys who put it together. It was my first one, and not only was it my first one, but we got a chance to show the film there. Did a really energetic Q&A afterwards. We had a really good crowd. We had screened it at a couple other places prior to that. Not nearly as many people, though. And I think the audience was really into it. They asked really insightful questions, not the normal, where'd you shoot it, how much did it cost, blah, blah, blah. They were really asking about deeper aspects of it. As you could tell, I get really passionate. I could talk about it all day. And, it got to the point where Todd had to say, okay, we need to show the next film now. Because I think between my enthusiasm and there were other people from the cast and crew there with me and the audience, we could have probably talked another hour or two about the film, which is so satisfying. I think the worst thing you can do is make something and nobody has any reaction to it whatsoever. So if people want to talk about it, I can see this influence in it, or what was the thought behind this, or this is how I interpret it. I can't get enough of that, quite frankly. I love that. It was a great screening.
Well, I think that's probably the worst review is indifference.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, I would agree with that.
I can take people not liking my work because I can look at it objectively and say, well, this isn't for everybody. But when somebody reads it but has no reaction to it, then I feel like I haven't done my job.
It's all, I guess, from a film perspective, the worst thing is if you go to a screening and you're sitting in a room and nobody comes in, right? And I've been to festivals where they've shown a lot of movies, and depending on what time they're showing your movie or whether the filmmaker's there or not, what other films are up against yours, because there might be multiple films playing at the same time. You might literally be the only person sitting in a room, and I always think that's tragic. It's a shame. People put their hearts and souls into this stuff, and all they really want, in my case, all I want is for people to see. People ask me, what do you want from this film? I want people to see it. I'm not looking to make money from it. I'm not looking to launch a career from it. It was a deeply personal film for all the reasons I had explained earlier. I'm very proud of it. I just want people to see it. You're right. If people are indifferent toward it, if they see it and they have no reaction, then to me that's just devastating.
When I was talking with Jeremiah during his interview, he talked about the shoot as being very difficult.
Maybe just a tad.
and being that this was your first screenplay,
yeah,
was there a point where you just said, "Oh, fuck it! What did I get myself into?"
Yeah. I mean, let me just step back for a minute, because Jeremiah. I hope most of your listeners know Jeremiah. If you don't know Jeremiah, just go to IMDb, type in his name, and you'll see the guy's body of work. The dude has serious street cred, right? So here I am. I'm working with this guy who has this wealth of experience. It's my first movie, and his reaction to the movie is, "This is the worst shoot I've ever been on in my life." And I'm thinking, wow, this is my first film, and this guy who's made all these movies, I've managed to make it the worst experience of his life. So yeah. It was, and definitely to get back to your original question though, we filmed it in New Jersey. As I said at the beginning when you asked me, I'm more from the Philly area, Philly suburbs, so I had to drive 90 minutes to and from every time we shot. We would go late. I think anybody who shot a film realizes you put in long hours, you put in as many hours as you can, and then you go away and you come back and you do it the next day. So there was a point where I think the film was about 80% finished. Just so you know, we did crowdfunding, but the vast majority of the film was paid for out of my pocket. You just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And at one point I was driving home, it's like 1 a.m, just like drained. I'm doing the math in my head of how much I put into this, and we're 80% finished. And I thought, what if I just stop? It really was gotten to the point where I thought, can I live with it if I just walk away and have nothing to show for it other than the fact that I dumped all of this money into something and I've got nothing for that investment. I think in many ways that's what continued to drive me. I was almost like Fitzcarraldo trying to get the ship over the mountain. Nothing. I really became obsessive to the point where, and like any type of obsession, it tends not to be a healthy thing. but you're not going to stop until it's done. And I think that's kind of, it was a hard shoot. And I should have probably made some tougher decisions, but I don't know that I ever really could have walked away from it, even when it was at its worst. Even when I had second doubts, I don't think I ever could have just given up.
How closely did you work with Jeremiah? Was he receptive to changes and ideas and suggestions that you may have had?
Well, it was my first film, and I could have grabbed a bunch of friends and bought a case of beer and said, "Hey, let's make a movie," and the movie would have looked exactly like I grabbed a bunch of friends and gave them a case of beer and we made a movie. I don't know if I'll ever make another movie, but I told myself, if I make a movie, it needs to be professional. It needs to be quality. It needs to be something I'm not ashamed of. So from day one, when I knew Jeremiah was on board, I just stood back. And in a lot of ways, it was film class for me, because I got to watch Jeremiah work. I got to watch all these professionals work, doing things that I don't know how to do. Right? So I was learning on the job. And did I have his creative input? Maybe not as much as I would have liked sometimes, but where I really appreciated Jeremiah the most was his ability to get a performance out of somebody. I'm talking about me specifically, but he got good performances out of everybody. But I'm talking about me because it was really not counting what I mentioned earlier about being in baggage for a couple lines. This was my first movie. If people say my performance is pretty good, I got to chalk up a lot of that to Jeremiah working with a novice actor and really helping me.
It reminded me of, and I hate to keep going back to Cronenberg, it just seems appropriate.
Possible not to, yeah. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
Your performance reminded me of his performance in Nightbreed as Decker. A very monotone, and I don't mean monotone in a negative way, but a very one-note, emotionless person.
It's funny that you say that, because nobody brought that up before, but the one time that character did come up, we were working on the poster for the film, and the poster eventually became the T-shirt for the film, right? This is all stuff that I did as part of the crowdfunding. And the scientists are on the poster, but I'm not, right? And I thought, I'm making a movie, and I'm in it. I want to be on, ego's getting the better of me, right? And Jeremiah says to me, he's like, Cronenberg wasn't on the poster for Nightbreed. And I was like, shit, you got me. Okay, I'll stop whining. I think if I ever brought something up, just invoke the name of Cronenberg, and I'll be put right back into my place. But I never really thought of that comparison before. But I think when I think about it, I think I can see that. I can definitely see that. I think I need to go back and watch Nightbreed now, especially now that the director's cut is available. I haven't caught that one yet. I should probably give that a watch and see how I match up against the great David Cronenberg in his role.
Oh yeah, the director's cut adds a whole new dimension to it. It's fantastic. It was well worth the wait of years and years and years to see that extra footage.
Yeah, I hear nothing but good things about it. It's just, I think sometimes when you have limited time to watch a movie, you tend to focus on things you haven't seen yet, but I really do need to set aside some time and go back and revisit that film. I probably haven't seen it since when did it come out? I probably saw it in the theater, so maybe I'm dating myself a little bit. I actually saw it in the theater, yeah.
That's okay, I'm an old fart, so you're fine.
Okay, I'm in good company then, I don't feel so bad.
You're in very good company. Well, you said that you were writing stories and stuff from a very young age. Did you ever publish anything?
In college and some zines and things like that. Nothing that anybody could go back and find right now. Not anything I would want anybody to go back and find, quite frankly. I kind of look back at the stuff I wrote in college when I was, long hair and all black, and the world didn't understand me. I read that stuff now and I just cringe. I'm like, oh yeah. Wow, what an idiot I was at that age. But other than that, I've been writing for all my life. I write professionally, not fiction. So I've been fortunate enough to have writing as part of my life for most of my life. But I haven't really. If I write, the next thing I was thinking of doing, I might write a book, because people tend to self-publish now, and I think, why not? I've written some other scripts, but I don't know if anybody will ever show any interest in them. So for me, writing is just something I enjoy doing, right? So it doesn't necessarily matter whether it gets published or not. Sometimes the act of writing is what I find most satisfying.
Well, it's certainly I know for me it's a very cathartic experience.
Yeah, it sure does. I think that for that reason, I think writers and people who work in horror who sort of have, I've talked to Jeremiah about this, you may even said it on your show, people tend to look at those people as weirdos, but in a lot of ways, those people are so incredibly well-adjusted because they have the outlet, right? You know, imagine if you couldn't write or you couldn't make a horror film or whatever the case may be. How would you somehow express that loss or anger or happiness? It's difficult to do. I think we're fortunate that we have that medium and that ability to, as you said, you can let that stuff go. You can look at the stuff in your life and maybe in some ways honor it, but in other ways let go of it. It's such a great experience.
Who are some of the writers that you like to read?
You know, it's the usual cast of characters. Poe, I mentioned Poe earlier. Lovecraft, huge Lovecraft fan. Non-horror writers, and some of these writers, surprisingly, I tried to emulate to some degree in my script. James Ellroy, Cormac McCarthy, David Mamet. I mean, these aren't necessarily names you would hear from somebody making a horror film, but I just love their use of language, and they're pretty influential as well.
Yeah, Elmore Leonard is one of those writers who does dialogue like nobody's business.
I'm a fan of Elmore Leonard too. Yeah, I'll put him in that. List for sure.
He's one of those writers who, when I read him, I just think, screw it, I can't do anything like this. Who am I kidding?
Yeah, I know. That's the other half of it, right? You read this stuff and it's entertaining, but on the other hand, it's so discouraging because you think, this is what, can I ever possibly match this? It's a pretty high watermark.
They certainly set a high standard, that's for sure. And I think the best writers try and at least aim for that.
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely.
And with the proliferation, of self-published ebooks, there are so many that don't even come close to that or don't even attempt it. And sometimes it's, and particularly with even indie films, to get noticed and to make a name for yourself. Although I think Painkiller's done a pretty good job of that so far.
Yeah, I mean, we're still waiting to hear from other festivals. Still early on, because if you're submitting for a festival now, it's going to be several months before you get a yay or nay. But that's my next course of action, really, is to try to get it in as many festivals as I can, because as I had said earlier, my primary goal is just to get people to watch it. And I think that's probably the best outlet for doing that right now is through festivals.
Do you have any festivals coming up?
It's showing at Horror Hound this month. It's not a festival; it's a convention. But beyond that, I don't have anything on the books. We showed a couple places. You mentioned Cafe Z. There were a couple conventions and festivals in the beginning of the year. But right now, it's just wait and see mode with my fingers crossed. And I do my research. I try to sit down at least maybe once every weekend and look for a festival and submit it. Right. It can get kind of costly though. There's a lot of festivals. There's a admission fee or a submission fee, I should say. And whether you get in or not, they're going to keep your money. So you need to be careful when you're selecting which festivals.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. How do you select a festival that you want to submit your film to?
There are a number of sites out there where you can go and research festivals. I just do research. I've been talking to other filmmakers who've submitted to film festivals, people who have way more experience doing this than I do, and getting their recommendations and talk to people. One of the nice things about doing the few festivals I have done is I've made these really great connections. I don't even want to think of them as connections. I want to think of them as friendships, because it's such a tight-knit community where people they're willing to go above and beyond to help you. They'll give you information, they'll give you direction. They just love what they do, and they love that other people love it, and they'll support any way they can. So, one of the things I try to look for, whether the festival's been around for a while, does it have a good reputation, and that type of thing. And because every time you submit, it's usually a submission fee that goes along with it. You don't want it to be some sort of fly-by-night festival that just takes your money, never watches your film. We've heard horror stories like this. So just need to be a bit judicious, do your homework, and make sure that you're getting the best consideration for your investment.
Who's some of the filmmakers that you like as well? I'm obviously, since we've talked about Cronenberg, I know he's one of them.
Yeah, Cronenberg. Off the top of my head, I love David Fincher an awful lot. And who else would I consider like a great? It's hard. Those are the hard questions to answer. It's like who's your favorite author? Who's your favorite director? I have pretty a wide range of taste. So, for example, when making a movie like this, I admire the obsessive detail of someone like a Kubrick or a Kurosawa, and to whatever degree I could have that sort of influence on a film, I would. But when you hear people talk about them, or you look at their films and you realize anything in the frame at any moment probably isn't there by chance, right? Even the littlest nuance might have been a major decision for one of those directors. That is so impressive to me.
Yeah, I've been doing a retrospective of Terry Gilliam's films, and one of the things that constantly amazes me about his work is the attention to detail and the art direction and the sets and how incredibly full they look.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you go back to even the stuff he was doing for Monty Python. This guy's just groundbreaking. But he's another director I really love.
What movies have you seen this year? And do you have time to see a lot of movies, I should say, with the festivals circuit and making the movie and promoting it? What?
I try to get in front of Netflix whenever I can, and I'll kind of hear what people are talking about and try and seek those things out. So I can't think of any really off the top of my head, but that's what I tend to do is if I can get in front of Netflix once a week, and my friends are always talking about movies, and they say, "Oh, you talk about that. You should check this out. You should check that out." I'm always constantly looking for something. Do you have any recommendations? You should probably see more movies than I do. Is there anything cool that I should be looking for? Yeah.
Oh, I heard about this movie Painkiller. That was pretty good.
Yeah, it was all right.
Actually, no, I'm like you. I've got 2 podcasts that I do a week, and I actually record more than that, so I have a little bit of a supply in case somebody drops out. So I don't, plus doing my own writing and other work to pay bills, I don't have as much time to watch movies as I wish I did.
Yeah, no, it would be great, just to have a job where you sit down and could just watch movies all day.
No, unfortunately, life just doesn't roll that way for us. What have you got coming up? Do you have anything in the pipeline?
Sadly, no. I'm realistic. This may be the only film I've ever done, but I'm okay with that if that's what it comes down to. I did write a script for another short film, and I shared it with some people. I got some positive reaction, but no real interest in making it. And as most things in the indie community, it really comes down to finance, budget, funding, that type of thing. And after putting so much money into Painkiller, I thought, well, next time around, I just can't afford to do that. If I could do it solely through crowdfunding, or at this point, if a director out there is looking for a film to make, when I wrote Painkiller, I wrote it with me playing a part in it in mind. So I wrote a role specifically for me. But I'm not doing that now. I'm just writing things that I find interesting. So I don't need to be in the film. I don't need to be deeply involved with the film at this juncture. I'm perfectly happy with a writing credit. So I've written one short film. Was co-writing another short film that I thought was coming on quite nicely. I have another short film sitting on my desktop that I can circle back to. And I'm almost done what I thought would be a short film, but it's feeling more like a feature at this point. This one really does have a strong Lovecraftian influence on it. So that's the one I'm spending the most time on right now. But again, if I can't get the funding for a short film, probably a feature film is way out of the realm of possibility. But like I was saying earlier, sometimes the act of writing is the reward. So I write these things, and I tend to like them after they're done. And if they don't get made, they don't get made. But I still take satisfaction in the act of creating them.
it first came to worse, you can always adapt it into a story or a novel and get it out there yourself.
That's it. I think even after Painkiller, I thought, well, maybe I should just stick to writing fiction. Try to write a book because, the nice thing about being a writer is it's you and it's the page. No need to collaborate with anybody. You don't have to deal with painful shoots or anything like that. It's just you and your mind and wherever your creativity takes you, and it's great. It's great fun to do stuff like that.
And you don't have to worry about a budget.
No, you don't. And with self-publishing nowadays, just about anybody could probably, with the right drive, can kind of get it out there. I think the drawback to that, you were, I think, alluding to this earlier, not just with music and books and film and everything. There's so much of it now, so much content, because it's so easier for people to get it out there. It's equally hard to be heard through all the noise. So even when we made the film, and I thought it was a good film, there's so many other films out there right now, and getting people's attention. Think about what we were talking about earlier. When was the last time you watched a movie? It's hard to even find time to watch a movie nowadays. So I think that's one of the drawbacks. One of the benefits is it's much easier to get your work out there. The drawback is it's much harder to get people's attention to actually look at it or read it or listen to it or whatever the case may be.
Oh yeah, it's certainly a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's never been easier to get your work out there, but on the other hand, it's never been easier for everybody else to get their work out there too. Exactly.
You're competing with all these other people, but at the same time, as I was saying earlier, it really is a sense of community. There are all these other people out there, and they're doing the same exact thing. But then you meet them, and they're just wonderful people. They're interested in the same things you're interested in. You sit down with them, you have a beer, you talk about film. Before you know it, a few hours have flown by, and you just had the time of your life. So maybe it's a little bit harder to get your work in front of an audience, but I think it's much easier to connect with like-minded people, and in a way, that's a benefit of doing this as well. I mean, I've been to film festivals before, but almost like a tourist, right? I'm there as a fan watching films, but now I go to a festival, and I'm not a star. Let's not get crazy, but I can talk to filmmakers and appreciate things they're saying in ways that I couldn't before I had been involved with the film, right? Because I had no idea what goes into making a movie until I actually made one. It was really an educational experience in so many ways.
It was almost like a baptism by fire in your case.
Blood and fire. Yeah, it was. It was. What's interesting though is we went over schedule, went over budget, yada yada yada. There's always talk about a rap party, and I think we just wanted to rap each other over the head by the time we were done with this thing, and it ended with almost like a whimper, like, okay, we're done, and we all went our separate directions, but as I was driving home, I thought, I don't have to come back here. We were shooting on weekends, and I thought, I don't have to come back here next weekend, and I was bummed to a degree, even though it had been such a horrible experience. It was something I looked forward to on the weekends, just being part of the process. Even if it had been painful, even if there were people there I really didn't ever want to see again, but just to be involved in it just had this sense of energy I'd never felt before, and I knew I had lost that now. I wasn't going to be part of that anymore. So, good and bad, I suppose I could say.
Well, and one of the things that you mentioned a couple of times, it's something that I've actually, I talked about this with Todd, whose show, by the time this airs, will have been last week's show, was the sense of community with indie filmmakers and indie writers, and how important that is in helping each other to get their work out there, because there's more success in doing it that way than the every man for himself attitude.
Absolutely, and I'm happy to say that just about everyone I met, with a few exceptions, they've been very approachable. I mean, even people who you might consider successful in terms of getting a lot bigger audiences or getting a lot of buzz around their films. People who, in a sense, if you look at their movies, they're really these nasty, atrocious films. Not that they're bad films, but they're definitely films that are hard to stomach. And you approach these people, and they're like the sweetest guys in the world, And they always make time for you. They're always helpful. they're always as equally enthusiastic, and I've not had a bad experience yet reaching out to a filmmaker or talking to a filmmaker or going to a film festival and connecting with people. Each and every time, it's just amazing. So, to give you an example, we were at Macabre Fair, which is a festival in Long Island.
Yeah, actually, it was in Hauppauge, which is where my mom drove a bus for many years.
Oh, yeah, yeah, you're right. They kind of moved it, but all right, well, there you go. That's where we were, and this was back in January, and there was a group of Canadian filmmakers there. We just got to talking, and I stuck around, watched their movie. They stuck around, watched my movie. We stayed in touch, and it's like, hey, here's some festivals up in Canada. What's going on in the U.S. and I never would have had that opportunity in any other event, right? If I had made a film and gone to a film festival, been able to sit down with all these really great filmmakers from Canada, and I can learn from them, and I can just enjoy spending time with them and talking to them, and they were just great guys. And I have so many stories like that where you just go and you connect with people, and they're into it, and you're into it, and everybody's into it, and it's this feeling. It's just I know I'm probably babbling on and on about it, but it's such a great feeling, you know.
Oh no, it definitely is. And one of the things that I find interesting, some of the guests that I've had on Imaginarium have been through Hollywood publicists. Some I've met through independent directors and writers, like Jeremiah and Alfredo Archulesi and Tom Ryan and a few others. And the amount of support that I've gotten from indie communities, because they don't just like, my messages on Facebook for their shows. They do it for everything. And they've been very helpful and supporting in getting other people onto my show as well. And that's not something that I get from other sources very much. And that tells me a lot about the community.
Yeah, and I couldn't, you put it much more succinctly and probably much more clearly than I was trying to do with my my rambling. But, I mean, the people you just mentioned, like Tom, I mean, I talked to Tom. Tom was a guy, Tom Ryan, who did Chases. It's, for those listening might not be aware, it's on the festival circuit as well. It's winning awards. It's a great feature. Tom is just a fantastic person. He was at Cafe Z, of course. And he sat down, we talked about film festivals. Like, he has submitted to all these film festivals. I said, well, how do you go about that? And he took the time to talk to me about it, right? And even after the fact, we can message each other on Facebook. I have another question, and you never get the sense that it's an annoyance. They're happy to help. And if I were ever to do more, I would like to pay it forward. If somebody were to approach me one day, if I were to do additional films, somebody approached me one day and had questions, I'd like to do the same. Rob Dimension, who did Baggage, was one of the producers for Painkiller just because I respected his wealth of knowledge. And I could call him up and say, well, how do you get a DVD made? Or how do you get a T-shirt printed? Or Rob, I'm losing my mind. How do you retain your sanity while making a movie? He was like my priest, my therapist. He was all that stuff, just saying, okay, Jared, calm down. It's going to be okay. Just take a breath. It's such a great community, and I'm part of it now. To maybe to a smaller degree, but I like people like get their films out there. I help share that stuff. Social media is fantastic for that, right? People post something, you can share it, you can like it, you can comment on it, and you begin to see the same names, faces, and you make those connections, and it just grows and grows and grows, and that's, I'm still a novice at all this, I'll be the first to admit it, but just feeling part of that, it's so rewarding to me.
Well, it's that sense of belonging, or sense of acceptance. I found my tribe.
Yeah. What a scary tribe it is, too, but I love them to death.
And it's funny, I saw Painkiller before I saw Baggage. And when I watched Baggage, and I really enjoyed Baggage. I thought that was a great little, it was almost like a Twilight Zone episode. And then I recognized you as the boss from Baggage, from when you were in Painkiller. And I got this, little light in my eyes. And I thought, oh, that's very cool. And I started to see how, just how close the community was. And, everybody shares, everybody's actors and DPs and whatnot. It's really kind of a nice nice little experience.
Yeah, most of the crew from Painkiller came from Baggage. Most of the cast did too. So the scientist Tom Adolia, he played one of the thugs in Baggage. Kelly, who played the lead in Painkiller, was a barmaid in Baggage. So these are all people Jeremiah have worked with and trusted. Believe me when I tell you, when Jeremiah got back to me and said, "I'll do this film. I like the script. I'll do this film," that's what drew people, because people want to work with Jeremiah. I never could have had that level. I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now. I wouldn't have that level of exposure. I wouldn't have been able to attract that level of talent to the film on my own, doing this for the first time. So you're right. It's just the fact that I tell Rob this all the time, and I tell other people who listen to me, without Baggage, there wouldn't be Painkiller, period. And I'm grateful. I'll always be grateful to Rob for that. So I had a similar moment where I was watching a movie called The Collectors, a short film, and I looked, I'm like, that's Tom Ryan. I had no idea he was in it. And then I bumped into him later in the festival. I was like, I saw you in The Collectors. He's like, oh yeah, I didn't. Yeah. And you get that moment, like, I know that guy, and you begin to see the same faces, and then in a way, you almost become like starstruck. You see these people at the festivals, and you're like, wow, I just saw you in a film, and it's this great feeling. But yeah, there's definitely this sense of not only community, but the sense of sharing. And Tom is really great at that. He's a big proponent of putting people in touch with, you need a cinematographer, you need a makeup guy, who do you know? Just ask. The more people you ask, you might be surprised. Somebody knows somebody who knows somebody, and that's how things happen. You don't. None of this stuff happens in a vacuum, right? If I tried to do all this on my own, I would have been very isolated. Would not have enjoyed it as much as I did. It just would have been a completely different experience, completely different result. It wouldn't have been nearly as good.
And speaking of sharing, we'll be sharing the links for Painkiller and everything else for the movie on the website and the show page when that goes up. Thanks for coming on, Jerry. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. It was a real pleasure. I'm really honored that you had me on the show.
And as I said, we'll have links on the show page where you can find information out about Jerry and Painkiller, as well as usual social media stuff. And if you enjoy the Imaginarium, check out our other shows on the Supernauts Network at thesupernauts.com. And until next time, may all your journeys be filled with pure imagination.